Lisa, thanks so much for being here. So can you just tell us first, what do you see as the biggest obstacle that working mothers are facing right now in the workforce?
Sure. Thanks for having me. I think the biggest obstacle that working mothers are facing is burnout. 93% of moms have said that they're burned out, according to a survey by Motherly last May.
And talk to us about that. I mean, we've talked about how women have been taking on additional hours as opposed to men, but talk about how that's sort of manifesting in the workplace.
Sure. I think even before the pandemic, we've heard of something called a motherhood penalty, where research shows that women's earnings actually decrease 6% when she has a child, and men's earnings actually increase 4%. And what happens is it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy, because if there are assumptions in the workplace by managers thinking that she's not going to be as committed, thinking that she's not going to want to take on that responsibility, they're not going to give her the meatier assignments. They're not going to give her the bigger clients. Therefore, she's not going to be able to produce as much for the firm. Therefore, her bonus and her compensation is going to go down. So I think the biggest thing that workplaces can do is not assume. My father taught me very early what happens when we assume. So what managers, what companies need to do is ask her, does she want more responsibility? Is she open to travel? What are her career aspirations? And most importantly, how can I support you in your career development? And then the most important thing that a manager can do is listen and then help.
Listen, and Lisa, I was just talking to Olivia Rockman, one of our reporters here, about how working mothers who are in lower wage jobs have really been affected throughout this pandemic. So what is it that companies who are maybe employing women in lower wage jobs can do? Is it the same sort of tools that you just outlined there?
So I think it's a combination. I think one of the most important things that companies can do is create the space. Create the space, even for folks in lower paid jobs. You might not have the flexibility, and I'd love to talk about that in a second, about work from home and this wonderful experiment that we all just went through during the pandemic. But I think we need to normalize parental leave. We need to normalize and having men take more of the responsibility at home. One of the biggest misconceptions that came out of this entire pandemic, and I heard it even from my husband when he was talking with his team about going back to the office, is the nomenclature, the vocabulary. Men do not share in the unpaid labor at home. Men do share in the unpaid labor at home. Excuse me. Men do not help. I am not helping her. I am sharing in that unpaid labor at home. And I think we need a complete mindset on that front.
So it's more about the discussion around what it is that parents are doing.
I think that's one thing. And then I think the other thing is what you were talking about earlier is paid family leave, universal childcare, preschool for everybody. Even with the childcare credit that's coming out, I think it starts today, up to $3,600. But if it's costing $11,000, $12,000 to put your child in daycare, on average, that doesn't cover it. That covers maybe a third of the year. So we really need to value that unpaid labor at home.
And Lisa, we should mention you are a mother yourself. I'm curious, sort of what's been beneficial to you throughout this pandemic, and what have you learned as a working mother as well?
Sure. So during the entire pandemic, I've actually leveraged my management skills. So we talk about leverage in finance all the time, but it's really just getting the most out of what you currently have. So I coined myself CEO of the house, and I implemented all of the management skills that I teach and that I learned when I was in grad school, and divided up the responsibilities, got everybody to come together to say, when are we going to clean the house? And I gave them fancy titles like vice president of kitchens and director of toilets. And my kids are a little bit older, so they're 13 and 15. And if you're taller than me, then you can share in the housework. And I'm also fortunate enough that I have a partner at home. So We all divided up the housework. There wasn't much complaining. My husband and I found out that our kids are actually better cooks than us. And I'm still only cooking once every 4 nights because we've equally divided it. So in addition to reducing the burden for me personally, I am creating productive members of society long-term that will be supportive partners when they grow up for their families as well.
Really fascinating. You said Vice President of Toilets, Lisa?
Yeah, good title, right?
That is a good title. Lisa Kaplowitz, Executive Director of the Rutgers Center for Women in Business and Assistant Professor of Professional Practice in Finance and Economics at Rutgers Business School. Thank you so much for joining us on our focus today.